Right, let's continue our book reading about John Hopkins cardiothoracic surgery textbooks, chapter 12. Esophageal physiology, function test, and endoscopic techniques. Key concept. Physiology. The basic function of the esophagus is to propagate a bolus from the oropharynx to the stomach. The coordination of esophageal muscle contraction, phagal innervation, and sphincter relaxation allows this event to occur. Function test. Primary esophageal motility disorder can be diagnosed using conventional or high-resolution manometry. Various systems are available for reflux testing, including 24-hour catheter based on pH monitoring, wireless capsule pH testing, and combined pH impedance. Endoscopic technique: high-resolution endoscopy, chromoendoscopy, narrow-band imaging, and confocal endomicroscopy are techniques that enhance the esophageal mucosa, improving diagnostic yield in Barrett's esophagus and early esophageal cancer. Endoscopic ultrasound adds imaging from the adjacent structure and is useful for staging and fine needle aspiration. Multiple ablative techniques are now available for BE, Barrett's esophagus, and early esophageal cancer, and include endoscopic mucosal resection, photodynamic therapy, radiofrequency ablation, cryotherapy, and endoscopic mucosal dissection. Let's read about physiology. Although the basic function of the esophagus is to simply propagate a bolus of food from the oropharynx to the stomach, the execution of this function remains complex. Ultimately, the swallow mechanism is a dynamic process between a muscle of esophagus and its narrow innervation, and involves interplay between the upper esophageal sphincter and lower esophageal sphincters. The esophagus is a hollow tube, usually between 17 and 30 centimeter, but averaging 23 centimeter. The proximal end is the UES, which is approximately 1 centimeter in length. The UES is composed of striated cervical esophageal muscle, the cricopharyngeus, and the inferior pharyngeal constrictor muscle. The superior and inferior head muscle and superior pharyngeal muscle also help facilitate US opening. Innervation of the US arise from branch of the vagus nerve stemming from the nucleus ambiguous. Tonic closure of the US function to prevent insufflation of air during inspiration and esophag- esophago-pharyngeal reflux. Intermittent relaxation of the US allows bolus transit and venting, belching. The esophageal body is composed of two different types of mesotes. Although somewhat variable in general, the proximal third of the esophagus is striated muscle and the distal two-thirds composed of smooth muscle. The transition is not upward, and thus there is a short segment in which the muscle fibers are mixed. The arrangement is such that there is an outer longitudinal muscle layer and inner circular muscle layer. This arrangement facilitates peristaltis, which will be discussed below. Between the longitudinal and circular muscle layers lies the mesenteric or Auerbach plexus. This network's neurons contains ganglia arising from the vagus nerve. Although the concentration of ganglia affecting the smooth muscle portion is higher than the striated muscle portion. Ganglia innervating striated muscle stem from the nucleus ambiguous, while ganglia innervating smooth muscle stem from the dorsal motor nucleus of the vagus. The neurotransmitter acetylcholine plays a role in activation of both striated and smooth muscle in the esophagus. Acetylcholine released by nerve ending activates the esophageal striated muscle. Postganglionic neurons in the distal esophagus active smooth muscle cells by releasing acetylcholine. Inhibitory innervation of the esophageal smooth muscle, which induces relaxation, is achieved by release of the nitric oxide and vasoactive intestinal polypeptide (VIP) from the postganglionic nerve endings. The mesenteric plexus is interconnected with Meissner plexus, which is located in the submucosa and is responsible for innervation of the circular muscle layer and muscularis mucosa. Sensory information is relayed in a dual manner via both vagal and spinal nerve. Esophageal sensation is extremely complex and beyond the scope of this chapter. In short, sensory information in the esophagus is relayed from either muscular afferent receptors or mucosal afferent receptors. In general, muscular afferent fibers respond to intraluminal distension, the pressure threshold leading to sensory nerve firing, and the rate of spontaneous firing differs among the vagal and spinal afferent neurons. In contrast, mucosal afferent fibers do not respond to distension but rather touch chemical irritation by acid, bile, and other agents. So the mucosal afferent fiber respond to chemical irritation. The less lower esophageal sphincter is a 2 to 4 centimeter high pressure zone that provides a barrier between the distal tubular esophagus and stomach, composed of intrinsic circular muscle of the esophagus and extrinsic muscle from the crural diaphragm. Motor innervation again stem from the vagus nerve with preganglionic nerve releasing acetylcholine. The less contracts in response to postganglionic excitatory neurons releasing acetylcholine. The less release with postganglionic inhibitory neurons releasing NO or VIP. The less is tonically contracted and released via reflex mechanism in response to swallow. The less also relaxed in response to vomiting, belching, and rumination. And transient less relaxation, TLASRS, is seen in normal patients and are increased in patients with gastroesophageal reflux disease or GERD. TLISRs also increase in response to gastric distension via reflex pathway. Bolus transport occurs with peristalsis of the esophagus. Voluntary oropharyngeal deglutition triggers waist relaxation. Once the bolus enters the esophagus, the UES closes and esophageal pace of swallowing takes over. The swallow event triggers primary peristalsis or sequential esophageal muscle contraction, which occlude that esophageal lumen, and primary peristaltis propels the bolus forward down to esophagus, and pressure of at least 20 mm Hg is needed to propel the bolus forward. Contraction of longitudinal muscle also occurs, shortening the esophagus by approximately 2 centimeters. Peristaltic wave has a velocity of 3 centimeters per second in the upper esophagus and 5 centimeters in mid-esophagus and 2.5 centimeters in lower esophagus. With multiple rapid swallows, peristaltis remains inhibited until the last swallow. The control of primary peristalsis is centrally mediated. Secondary peristalsis is triggered with luminal distension for the purpose of clearing residual bolus material due to ineffective primary peristalsis or reflux event. Pharyngeal contraction and UVS relaxation are not seen in secondary peristalsis. The control of secondary peristalsis is intrinsic to the esophagus and is not centrally mediated. Local afferent sensory neuron respond to luminal distension and trigger contraction above the area of distension and relaxation below, moving the bolus forward. Esophageal function test. Barium studies of the esophagus. Barium esophagogram, also called barium solo, is a radiology test that the ability to help diagnose structural lesion of the esophagus as well as assess function. In a double contrast esophagogram, the patient engages effervescent agents to distend the esophagus. Next, high-density barium is swallowed in the upright position to obtain full views of the esophagus. Structural lesion may be seen including strictures, diverticula, webs, mass, and even esophagitis. Fluoroscopic views of the patient swallowing barium bolus while prone are used to evaluate esophageal motility. Certain features identified on a barium esophagogram are indicative of primary esophageal motility disorder. The classic esophagogram in achalasia shows a dilated esophagus with a bird's beak, narrowing of the distal esophagus. In advanced cases, the esophagus may appear massively dilated or tortuous, hence called sigmoid esophagus, with This classic barium study appearance and the EGD to roll out pseudoachalasia. Some argue manometry studies are not needed to diagnose achalasia. However, this remains controversial. A barium esophagogram performed in a patient with diffuse esophageal spasm, or this, will show a classic corkscrew esophagus. DA is manifest a repetitive non-peristaltic contraction that may obliterate the lumen. However, this classic finding is seen in less than 15% of the patient with DAs. The additional of a dynamic recording using a video called a video fluoroscopic solo study or cine esophagogram evaluates the pharyngeal pace of the swallow. Therefore, patients with symptoms of oropharyngeal dysphagia should have a cine esophagogram instead of just barium swallow. Esophageal scintigraphy. Another non-invasive image-based modality used to evaluate esophageal function is esophageal scintigraphy. These nuclear medicine studies use a radiolabel meal to evaluate esophageal transit and clearance. The study used a gamma camera, also called scintillation camera, to match ingested radioisotopes. Although a variety of protocols are available, the basic premise of this study includes ingestion of technetium 99M labeled substance like water, cornflakes, or apple sauce by the patient. Events are recorded at short interval to assess bolus transport from the oropharynx to stomach. The test can be performed upright, which is more physiologic, or supine, which eliminates the force of gravity and potential may pick up more subtle defects. The major parameter measured is total esophageal transit time, calculated time from time point of entry of radioactivity into the esophagus until below 10% of radioactivity remains in the esophagus. The test is easy to perform, quick, and easily tolerable for patients. When the technology first emerged, many proposed esophageal scintigraphy as useful screening test for esophageal dysmotility. One study measured esophageal scintigraphy and conventional manometry in 16 controls and 34 patients with established esophageal motility disorder. An abnormal study was defined as prolonged esophageal transit greater than 15 seconds. The results were significant for lack of false negative scintigraphy result and a 96% agreement between conventional manometry and scintigraphy. All patients with disorder of peristalsis due to achalasia, scleroderma, and DES had a abnormal scintigraphy. Of note, only 2 of 10 patients with esophagitis had a prolonged esophageal transit time, making scintigraphy a poor test for reflux disease. In contrast to the result of some early studies, a more recent study found that a greater number of false negatives using scintigraphy. Radionuclide studies were performed on 49 patients with established esophageal motility disorder and 14 controls. Although esophageal transit was prolonged in a patient with achalasia, EES, and non-specific peristaltic disorder, only a minority of the patients with nutcracker esophagus and hypertensive LAS had a prolonged esophageal transit time. This led the group to conclude that scintigraphy is useful in disorder with abnormal peristalsis, but a poor study in motility disorder or cases where peristalsis is preserved. The main limitation of esophageal scintigraphy is the limited number of swallows evaluated. As some motility disorders are intermittent, they could be missed by this test. This has led some groups to advise repeat scintigraphy in those patients with high clinical suspicion for disease. Another limitation is that the presence of hiatal hernia, particularly if a significant amount of stomach lies above the diaphragm, may be confused with a distal esophageal esophagus, leading to false positive result as a radioactivity will persist in the hernia sac. Esophageal manometry. Conventional esophageal manometry. Esophageal manometry is performed by placing a flexible catheter transnasally down to esophagus and into the stomach. Conventional esophageal sorry. Conventional esophageal manometry relies on either a multi-lumen water perfusion catheter attached to a pressure transducer or a catheter with a few discrete solid-state pressure sensors. When the information from the pressure transducer is transmitted to the computer and analyzed, continuous pressure information from the esophagus is obtained. The channels on the catheter are usually spaced 3 to 5 cm apart for a total of 6 channels. Unfortunately, this constraint doesn't allow for simultaneous recording of the pressure spanning the entire esophagus, including UES and less. Therefore, the catheter has to be prepositioned during the study to record from all points, starting in the stomach and slowly moving the catheter proximally, called the pull-through technique. Not all patients tolerate transnasal placement of the manometry catheter, and occasionally the catheters may need to be replaced endoscopically. Data from the studies are displayed on a 2D graph. The x-axis displays time and Y pressure on the left. There are 6 line tracing corresponding to each channel, displayed in order from the least distance from the nearest at the top of to the greatest distance from the nearest to the bottom, less. Next, high resolution manometry. In the in the last decade, major development in manometry technology have occurred. Newer catheters have more sensors that are closely spaced together 1 centimeter, which adds the ability to measure pressure within the entire esophagus, simultaneously spanning sparings to stomach. The system of monitoring pressure can allow the investigation of the full mechanics of swallows and bolus transport. A smaller segment of the esophagus not previously able to be evaluated by conventional manometry can be also analyzed. The large volume of data acquired from the high-resolution manometry system is displayed on a 3D color topographic map. As in conventional manometry, the x-axis displays time. The y-axis displays distance from the nearest, and again with UES at the top of the LES and stomach at the bottom. Pressure is denoted by color on the z-axis with warmer colors denoting high pressure and bluer colors denoting a low pressure. This topographic representation make it easier to evaluate the full dynamics of peristalsis and bolus transport from UAS to stomach. Although theoretically the high-resolution manometry system provides more data, it is unclear at this time whether it translates to greater clinical utility. However, it does appear to have a logistical benefit. The high-resolution manometry system is less operator-dependent, and as the pull-through technique is not needed. Furthermore, this study is now shorter for the patient with and may be more tolerable. Finally, the high-resolution system may be beneficial in those challenging cases where manometric subtleties are found. Right, next, uses of esophageal manometry. As a research as a research tool, manometry has helped clarify the intricacies of esophageal physiology. However, its clinical value is most useful when evaluating absence, weak, or abnormal peristalsis and abnormalities in LAS pressure and relaxation. With its closely spaced sensors, high-resolution manometry can also more easily define UES function and dysfunction compared with conventional manometry. As the UES only spans 1 centimeter in length, symptoms prompting manometry testing include dysphagia, reflux, and regurgitation and chest pain. Mechanical causes of dysphagia such as strictures or rings are far more common than motility disorder of the esophagus. Thus, manometry usually follows radiographic and endoscopic inspection of the esophagus in the evaluation of dysphagia. Unfortunately, many manometric abnormalities can be seen in asymptomatic healthy controls, and thus it is sometimes difficult to equate findings with motor disorder. However, there are certain manometric patterns of paracelsus and disorder dysfunction that correlate with specific disorder that lead to dysphagia. Ineffective paracelsus or complete apericelsis on manometry can be seen in a variety of systemic disorders, such as diabetes, connective tissue disease, scleroderma, and amyloidosis. Specific patterns of peristaltic abnormalities and less dysfunction also help diagnose primary esophageal motility disorder such as achalasia and DES. The use of esophageal manometry for symptoms of reflux is not straightforward. Certainly, ineffective esophageal peristalsis can be seen in patients with GERD. However, this is neither sensitive nor specific for GERD. Reduced LAS pressure can be seen on manometry can contribute to an impaired anti-reflux barrier leading to GERD. However, the manometry study may be too short to pick up the TLESRs that are fundamental to the pathophysiology of GERD. Further discussion of reflux testing is described below. Preoperative manometry for anti-reflux surgery is important for a ruling out of mortality disorder in which anti-reflux surgery would be detrimental. Specifically, fundoplication in a patient with scleroderma, achalasia, or DS can be used in the evaluation of recurrent dysphagia after the fundoplication once mechanical obstruction is rolled out. Use of preoperative manometry in prognostic determination of response to surgical treatment for GERD is more controversial. Some non-randomized studies found that preoperative peristaltic dysfunction could lead to postoperative dysphagia with a classical 36 360 degree of Nissen fundoplication. One group used a laparoscopic top-plate fundoplication in patients with peristaltic dysfunction on manometry and found lower rates of postoperative dysphagia compared with those with esophageal dysmotility who had a nascent fundoplication. However, a more recent randomized prospective study found no correlation between preoperative esophageal dysmotility on manometry and postoperative dysphagia in either a nascent or top-plate fundoplication. Therefore, there is no consensus how to optimally use preoperative manometry in reflux patient. Chest pain of esophageal origin may be due to esophageal hypersensitivity from chemical irritants, distension, or muscular contraction. Therefore, non-cardiac chest pain can be due to GERD or primary motility disorder, like achalasia, DES, and nutcracker esophagus. As GERD is the most common cause of esophageal chest pain, manometry would not be high-yield study for those limitations described above. Therefore, a manometry in the evaluation of chest pain usually follows through investigation and treatment of GERD. Aside from diagnosis, manometry can be used in the management of some of these disorders. There are emerging data that suggest that high-resolution manometric subtypes of achalasia may have different response to treatment, and high-resolution manometry in this patient may have prognostic information. Manometry can also identify residual high GA junction pressure that may be amenable to further the therapy in those patients with recurrent dysphagia following endoscopic or cervical therapy for achalasia. Next, esophageal reflux testing. Catheter-based pH testing. Ambulatory pH monitoring is used for diagnosis of GERD, evaluation of treatment failure, preoperative evaluation, and the test is involve placement of transnasal catheter 5 cm above the LES. patients are instructed to continue daily activities at diet. A 24-hour test will record a pH event with acid reflux event defined as a pH below 4.0 or 5 or more seconds. Patients also employ event buttons to record meals, postural changes, and symptoms. The most important recorded measurement include percentage of time when pH below 4 and percent of upright time when pH below 4, percent of supine time when pH below 4, number of reflux episodes above 5 minutes, and the longest reflux per episode. Using these six parameters, the mystery score is calculated to estimate global acid exposure. The sensitivity and specificity of ambulatory pH catheter testing for GERD reached 77 to 100% and 85 to 100%, respectively, in a patient with endoscopic proven esophagitis. However, the sensitivity of pH testing ranged from 0 to 71% in endoscopic negative reflux disease or NERD. Endoscopic negative reflux disease wireless capsule pH testing. Now available in wireless pH recording capsule. The Bravo system, Medtronic, Minneapolis, MN, USA. The system was devised to avoid the limitation of patient intolerance of transnasal catheter pH testing. The capsule is attached to esophageal mucosa using a flexible introducer positioned 6 cm above the GA junction and as determined by endoscopy or esophageal manometry. pH data are recorded into an external receiver by radiotelemetry. The wireless system is equivalent to catheter-based system in recording accurate pH data. The capsule naturally falls off several days after placement. The advantage of the wireless system is better patient tolerability. Patients are more likely to go about their normal routines, including diet and exertion, which may avoid false negative results. Furthermore, increased tolerability may translate to extension of study time. 48 hours of data increase the diagnostic accuracy for GERD. Disadvantage include greater cost of the test and the rare risk of chest pain requiring endoscopic removal of the capsule. Impedance testing. Broadly defined, GERD is the exposure of the esophagus to gastric contents causing symptoms. Wireless and catheter-based ambulatory pH monitoring can be measured the acidity of the reflux but doesn't evaluate quickly acidic or non-acidic reflux event, which may still cause symptoms. Thus, a system was devised to detect all types of the liquid movement in the esophagus using intraluminal electrical impedance. Intraluminal impedance monitoring uses a cylindrical catheter containing multiple metallic electrodes. It is pressed transnasally and swallowed by the patient to be placed within the esophagus above the GA junction. The principle behind measurement of impedance is that the current flow between two electrodes will depend upon the conductivity of the surrounding environment. A liquid bolus has a high electrical conductivity and thus the resistance or impedance between the two electrodes will drop. On the other hand, an air bolus has low conductivity and impedance will increase. The sequence of impedance changes between the different segments of electrodes can establish directionally to determine whether the flow is related to swallow material or esophageal reflux. Impedance is measured with at least three electrodes spaced 2 cm apart. The placement of the most distal electrodes should be 1 to 2 cm above the LAS. A number of studies have evaluated gas, liquid, and acid reflux in animals, asymptomatic controls, and patients with reflux using impedance monitor compared with fluoroscopic exam, manometry, and pH monitoring. The sensitivity for detecting reflux using impedance range from 92 to 99%. Therefore, the technical recommendation from workshop led by 11 GERD specialists advise that appropriate electrodes placement should detect at least 90% of reflux event. Sensitivity may be affected by conditions that led to low baseline impedance values. Esophagitis and Barrett's esophagus are two such conditions. Therefore, it is important to be aware that of these entities prior to analysis of impedance studies. Impedance monitoring is often combined with pH monitoring to increase diagnostic accuracy and determine the specific type of reflux causing symptoms. One study measured pH and impedance even in 60 patients with heartburn and regurgitation and established the statistical relationship between symptoms and reflux event. The combination of impedance and pH yield a higher proportion of patients with a positive symptom association probability or SAP compared with either test alone. Use of pH monitoring. Whether to perform pH monitoring on or off proton pump inhibitor therapy is debate, but this primarily depends on the purpose of the study. If the purpose is to define whether the patient symptoms are stemming from GERD or as opposed to another etiology, ambulatory pH monitoring should be performed of PPI therapy. Should the patient continue taking PPIs in this case, the study may be falsely negative. If the purpose of the study is to define whether PPI therapy is effective during acid exposure in patients with Crohn's GERD, the study would be useful to continuation of PPI therapy. Bilitek. Another element of symptomatic reflux disease may stem from reflux duodenal contents into the esophagus, hence called duodenal-gastroesophageal reflux disease, DGER. Duodenal-gastroesophageal reflux disease. The Blitech 2000 monitoring system uses a measurement of bilirubin concentration as a marker for duodeноgastric reflux. The probe that is inserted transnasally into the esophagus is fiber optic spectrophotometry that can identify presence of bile. Reporting takes place over a 24-hour period. There are several limitations to the Bilitech system. Notably, the sampling rate is once per 8 seconds. Therefore, it is unlikely to accurately evaluate timing of the EGR patient. In addition, solid material may become trapped in the sensor at the probe tip, impairing accurate measurement and increasing artifact. Thus, testing is most accurate when patients are on liquid diet, but unfortunately, this doesn't reproduce normal physiologic settings. Despite its limitation, the Blitech system is the only system that evaluates the presence of bile in reflux event. Endoscopic technique. Endoscopic imaging. High resolution and high magnification endoscopy. Endoscopy is used to visually inspect esophageal mucosa and may be used to inspect spastic or malignant tissue. The image quality depends upon magnification and resolution. Resolution is the ability to distinguish two closely spaced pixels and is expressed as a pixel density. Standard endoscopes carry chips that capture images with resolution of 640 to 700 pixels wide, uh, 480 and 525 pixel high. There are three high-resolution endoscope systems available in the United States. The chips in this system capture image resolution of Full HD and over a million pixels. These high-resolution endoscopes, yeah, sorry, let's continue. This high-resolution endoscope must be used with high-definition compatible system, including processor and monitor. A standard endoscope displays an image that is magnified 30 to 35 times. High magnification endoscope use a combination of digital and optical zoom to magnify up to 150 times. Higher resolution and magnification improves the quality of the image captures and display. Theoretically, this increases the detection of abnormal esophageal tissue like BA or malignancy. However, the majority of studies of However, the majority of studies of high-resolution or magnification endoscopy are also compare other techniques that are discussed below. Next, chromoendoscopy. Chromoendoscopy refers to application of stents or dyes via spray catheter to the gastrointestinal mucosa at the time of endoscopy. Stains available include global solution, methylene blue, toluidine blue, and crystal violet, classified as absorptive stains. These stains preferentially absorb in specific cells, allowing for distinction of cell types. Indigo, carmine, and enoch is a contrast dye that source in mucosal artifacts and can thus identify mucosal irregularities. Finally, reactive dyes such as Congo and red chemical react under certain conditions like low pH. Acetic acid is an agent that can be sprayed topically during endoscopy but doesn't dye that mucosa and thus is not technically considered a chromoendoscopy. However, it temporarily denatures glycoproteins in the mucosa and will help detect dysplastic or abnormal tissue. The major limitation of chromoendoscopy is that this increases procedure time. A high inter-observer variability also limits this technique. Chromoendoscopy can be used through the GI tract to detect inflammatory, dysplastic, or neoplastic tissue. In the colon, it is predominantly used for dysplasia surveillance in inflammatory bowel disease. In the esophagus, chromoendoscopy is predominantly used for detection of dysplasia in BE or early cancer, either adenocarcinoma or squamous cell carcinoma. In methylene blue chromoendoscopy, normal epithelial cells absorb the dye while dysplastic or malignant cells do not. Although several studies showed that in increase in diagnostic yield to detect dysplasia in BE using methylene blue as compared with a random biopsies. The recent meta-analysis of 9 studies failed to show a significant increase in diagnostic yield. However, this result may be an effect of difference in inclusion criteria and application technique in various studies. Next, narrow band imaging. A digital-based technique to enhance the contrast of mucosal changes may overcome this limitation. To eliminate mucosa, standard endoscopy uses a white light that passes through a rotary RGB filter to spread wavelength corresponding to red, green, and blue. Narrow band imaging uses a filter with a narrower range that predominantly allows blue and green wavelength to pass while blocking red wavelength. Given the longer wavelength of light penetrates the deeper layer of mucosa, the shorter blue and green wavelength enhance the contrast of the superficial mucosa. As a hemoglobin absorbs blue light, NBI is also particularly helpful in assessing microvasculature of the GI mucosa. The narrow band filter can be switched on and off by endoscopists, facilitating ease of use and with standard white light endoscopy. As in chromoendoscopy, NBI can be used through the GI tract, particularly for detection of early gastric cancer and chronic polyps or dysplasia. In the esophagus, NBI has most been studied in BE. Several classification systems have been devised to characterize NBI findings in BE. One group simplified a classification system into A to D. Grade A was characterized by round pits with regular microvasculature. Grade B flows rich pits with regular microvasculature. Grade C absent pits with regular microvasculature. And grade D the distorted pits with irregular microvasculature. This classification was validated in study where grade A had a high predictive value for columnar mucosa without BE. Grade B and C were predictive for non-dysplastic BE, and grade D predicted BE with high-grade dysplasia. Low-grade dysplasia could not easily be distinguished from non-dysplastic without dysplasia. Detection of high-grade dysplasia is important for determining management of BE. Current surveillance guidelines uh, use random full-quadrant biopsies over 1 to 2 cm of BE for dysplasia detection, but they may be suboptimal. Recent meta-analysis of 8 studies with close to 500 patients examined the accuracy of NBI in detection of high-grade dysplasia with histological confirmation. The pooled sensitivity and specificity was 96 and 94%, leading the authors to include that NBI has a high diagnostic accuracy for detection of high-grade dysplasia. Few studies have directly compared NBI with chroma endoscopic to determine which, aside from endoscopic preference, would be more beneficial in detection of dysplasia. The only randomized prospective study included 28 patients with known Barrett's and high-grade dysplasia or early esophageal cancer. Each patient was randomized to high-resolution endoscopic with adjunct NBI or high-resolution endoscopy with adjunct chroma endoscopy. 6 to 8 weeks later, the patient crossed over to the other modality performed by separate endoscopies. Although the majority of high-risk lesions were detected on high-resolution endoscopy alone, both NBI chroma endoscopy picked up several additional lesions equally well. Confocal endomicroscopy. Confocal laser endomicroscopy (CLA) is a tool that enables gastroenterologists to obtain real-time in vivo histology at the time of endoscopy. In CLA, tissue is illuminated with low-power laser. Laser light is reflected back and focused through the same lens, the size of a pinhole. The image obtained have a high enough resolution up to 1000 that histology information is available. This technique requires administration of intravenous or topical fluorescence agents. The most commonly used agent is intravenous fluorescence sodium, which is a renally excreted agent that is distributed within 7 to 14 seconds across the vasculature of GI tissue. These topical sprays that stain either nuclei or cellular cytoplasm may be used as well. CLE is available in a probe-based system or an integrated endoscopic system. In the latter, the confocal microscope is integrated into the distal end of wet light endoscope. Images from the integrated endoscopes are displayed from the integrated scope and are displayed on two monitors, concomitantly showing both video and endoscopic views. Probe-based CLE system are use a standalone confocal probe that can pass through the accessory channel of a standard endoscope. CLE has been used to classify colon polyps, determine diagnosis of or a direct celiac disease biopsies, detect early gastric cancer, Helicobacter pylori infection. In the esophagus, CLE is useful in detection of BE and early neoplasia. As in NBI and chroma endoscopic technique, CLE can distinguish BE from early neoplasia. Confocal endomicroscopic features of high-grade dysplasia include irregular cells with loss of normal cellular pattern, distorted subepithelial capillaries, and leakage of fluorescence. Clinically relevant outcomes using CLE technology is that fewer mucosal biopsies may be needed to detect the high-grade dysplasia or early neoplasia. One study randomized 39 patients to standard endoscopy with 4-quadrant randomized biopsy or CLE with 4-quadrant optical biopsies as well as targeted biopsies. Several weeks later, the patients were crossed over. The diagnostic yield for high-grade dysplasia or cancer was higher in the confocal endomicroscopy procedures. In those, in those 16 patients who were considered high risk with suspected but unlocalized neoplasia, there was an almost 60% reduction in the number of biopsies needed to obtain the diagnosis. The remaining 23 patients who were undergoing routine BE surveillance, 65% didn't require any mucosal biopsies based on confocal image and, and no neoplasia were identified. endoscopic ultrasound, and fine needle aspiration. Endoscopic ultrasound adds high-frequency sonographic information via an ultrasound transducer at the tip of endoscope to provide imaging of the GI wall and surrounding structures. And echo endoscopes are available in three types of design: radial array, curved linear array, and probe-based. Radial array endoscopes provide a 270 to 360-degree view of the surrounding structures, whereas curvilinear endoscopes provide a 180-degree view parallel to the scope. Some systems have Doppler capabilities to visualize blood vessels. The curvilinear endoscope is ideal for fine needle aspiration or FNA. The needle passes through the accessory channel will be seen in the plane of the ultrasound, allowing the accurate and safe biopsies or other therapies. Needle available range from 19 to 25 gauge and can penetrate up to depth of 10 centimeters. Days of use without FNA are equal to that standard endoscopy. Although still quite low at 1%, use FNA has a slightly greater risk than use without FNA. Notably, risk of infection during aspiration of cystic lesion is higher, and antibiotic prophylaxis is warranted. Use can be used for diagnosis and management of terminal GI, pancreatic, or biliary disorder. In the esophagus, use produce a image corresponding to 5 histologic layers of the GI tract. The endosonographic image appear as alternating hyper and hypoechoic bands. The innermost band is hyperechoic and correspondent to the lumen or superficial mucosal layer. The second layer corresponds to the lamina propria. The third corresponds the submucosa, and the fourth corresponds to the muscularis propria, and the fifth corresponds to adventitia. Beyond the adventitia, adjacent structures such as lymph nodes can be visualized. This makes use suitable for evaluation of submucosal lesion and staging esophageal cancer. Locoregional TNM staging is vital in determination of surgical or medical management of esophageal carcinoma. Use has a greater diagnostic accuracy for staging compared with computed tomography scanning. Furthermore, using cost-effective analysis models use may be more cost-effective than other strategies by detection of left lymph nodes, and that would prevent unnecessary surgery. Therapeutic procedures: endoscopic mucosal resection. Advanced endoscopic therapies may obviate the need for surgery in the certain case. Endoscopic mucosal resection, or EMR, is one such therapy that pertains esophageal pathology, particularly when BE with dysplasia and very early esophageal cancer that have not extended into the submucosal, although a variety of techniques have been described. The two major methods include EMR with cup or EMR with ligation, and the first step of mucosal resection includes injection of substance, usually normal saline with or without epinephrine, to lift the lesion in question of the muscularis propria. Other solutions like hypertonic saline, 10% glycerol or 5% fructose, and 50% dextrose and sodium hyaluronate have also been used. EMRC use a transparent cap fitted to the endoscope. Once the lesion has been lifted, a snare is passed through the accessory channel and opened inside the cap. The lesion is then suctioned into the cap where it can be excised with the snare. EMRL is a single band or multi-band ligation, device similarly to those used for treating esophageal varices. The band ligator is deployed, grasping the lesion into the polypoid configuration. This allows resection via snare and retrieval. The risks of EMR include perforation, bleeding, and structure malformation with a large areas of EMR. It appears that EMRC and EMRL have similar safety profiles. Despite these adverse risks, EMR is generally safe in experienced hands and can be done within an outpatient setting. Esophageal indication for EMR including early esophageal cancer and BE with dysplasia. Accepted criteria of AMR as proposed by Japanese Society of Gastroenterological Endoscopy include esophageal cancer lesion less than 2 cm in diameter and involvement of less than one of third of the esophageal circumference. AMR for lesion extending into the mucosa is contraindicated, and thus relevant investigation like use can be considered prior to AMR. Traditionally, patients with high-grade dysplasia in BE were offered esophagectomy, especially with light of possible concomitant carcinoma. However, now with ablative techniques such as EMR, patients may be offered endoscopic therapy instead. One study found curative rate of 96.6% when treating 279 patients with either high-grade dysplasia or early neoplasia. Patients require an average of 2 MR sessions to achieve complete response. This risk factor associated with local recurrence include piecemeal resection, long segment BE, lack of post-EMR ablative therapy, and time to complete response greater than 10 months, and multifocal neoplasia. Next, photodynamic therapy. Photodynamic therapy is another ablative technique for BE and early esophageal cancer. PDT can be used alone or may follow EMR to ablate residual dysplastic tissue after resection of focal lesion. The principle behind PDT is then when exposed to intense light, certain photosensitizing chemicals produce oxygen and other radical species. These radical species cause non-thermal cellular necrosis and vascular thrombosis. The only systematic photosensitizer approved by the FDA is porphyrin sodium. It is given as intravenous infusion over 3 to 5 minutes. Porphyrin sodium is absorbed by most tissue but is selectively retained in neoplastic tissue. After approximately 48 hours, the photosensitizer is only retained in neoplastic tissue and has cleared normal tissue. Thus, PDT endoscopic therapy is usually scheduled 48 hours after infusion. Porphyrin sodium becomes activated in response to light at 515 and 630 nanometer wavelength. Therefore, a specific light source has to be used at endoscopy, in contrast to standard white light endoscopy. The FDA approved 630 nanometer red light resource that available also contains an automatic feature to change power and duration of treatment based on indication procedure. A variety of catheter and balloons catheter are available to deliver light to pre-treated tissue in a circumference patient. Treatment is delivered for 8 to 12 minutes depending on indication. The main risk of PDT is structure formation. Risk factors for this complication include long segment BE, multiple PDT treatment and preceding EMR, history of chemoradiation, and history of prior structures, as some residual photosensitizer remains in patient skins for up to 30 days. They are advised to avoid direct sunlight as severe sunburn can result. Radiofrequency ablation. Radiofrequency ablation (RFA) is another technique used in BE and other conditions. RFA can be performed circumferentially or focally. Circumferential RFA in the esophagus uses a 3 cm balloon ablation catheter in which resides a coil array. Two pulses of electric current at energy level of 10 to 12 joule per centimeters are sufficient for ablation of full thickness epithelium without imaging the submucosa. Prior to placement of the balloon catheter, the esophageal luminal diameter has to be measured. The balloon ablation catheter's outer diameter must not be greater than the esophageal luminal diameter. The balloon ablation catheter is introduced via guide wire followed by endoscope. Focal RFA is usually performed after circumferential ablation if residual Barrett's tissue remains or when small amounts of BE are present. Instead of balloon ablation catheter, focal RFA uses an electrode array that is mounted on the tip of endoscope and seen in 12 o'clock position. As an MR and PDT, RFA can be used for BE with high-grade dysplasia. However, it has a role in low-grade dysplasia to prevent progression to high-grade dysplasia and cancer. Although more controversial, RFA can also be used in BA without dysplasia. Recent published was the longest-running study, AIM-2, which followed 50 patients who had RFA non-dysplastic BE. At 2.5 years, 98.4% of patients had complete eradication of all metaplastic tissue. At 5 years, 92% still had complete eradication, while the remaining patients obtained complete eradication with further treatment with focal RFA. Complications of RFA include bleeding, structures, and post-procedure pain. Next, cryotherapy. Cryotherapy is a non-thermal, non-contact ablative technique that, when applied via endoscopy, causes freezing of the mucosa and induction of necrosis. The technology is based on the Joule-Thomson effect that dictates that the temperature of liquid gas will drop when the surrounding pressure drops. There are currently two cryoablation systems available, one based on liquid nitrogen, and the other on carbon dioxide. The cryoablation system includes a pressurized canister of compressed gas or liquid nitrogen. This cryospray is delivered to the esophageal tissue via single-use site or end-firing catheter that passes through the standard endoscope accessory channel. Once the gas is released from the tip of the catheter, tissue spray freeze in the context of decreased pressure. A suction tube is affixed to the tube of the endoscope or passed separately next to the endoscope to simultaneously remove evacuated gas that would distend the GI tract. Each application lasts 10 to 12 seconds, and multiple applications can be performed to one area with 10 to 30 seconds in between each to allow that for thawing. Cryotherapy can ablate tissue through the GI tract and has been studied in gastric antral vascular ectasia or GAVE and radiation proctopathy. In the esophagus, cryotherapy is another ablative technique for BE and early carcinoma. Early data for cryotherapy suggests that it can eradicate high-grade dysplasia in high proportion of patients. Next, endoscopic submucosal dissection. Endoscopic submucosal dissection is technique used to remove esophageal lesions that are flat and greater than 2 cm. This provides the pathologist the opportunity to examine the tissue and block. The lesion is not removed via modified polypectomy, as in the EMR technique. The initial steps of ESD involves marking the margins with electrocautery. Next, the lesion is relieved with mucosal injection as described in the EMR section. An incision is then made in circumferential manner with a special endoscopic electrocautery knife. A variety of electrocautery knives have been developed for use. Once the lesion is dissected of the deeper layers, it can be removed and blocked. ESD can be time-consuming procedure, lasting over an hour for one lesion. Complications include acute or delayed bleeding, perforation, and stricture. Perforation rates for ASD are higher than those of EMR. The most experience with ASD comes from resection of early gastric cancer in Asia. However, ESD can be applied to high-grade dysplasia and early esophageal cancer as well. Esophageal dilation. Esophageal dilation can be used to manage benign and malignant esophageal strictures, post-surgical anastomotic strictures, and is a mainstay of therapy for achalasia. There are two basic kinds of esophageal dilators: balloon-based dilators and mechanical bougie dilators. Balloon dilators are typically passed through the scope and through the structures. For narrow structures, wire-guided balloons are available. There are several types of mechanical dilators, such as Maloney dilators, which are not wire-guided, and Safari dilators that are wire-guided. Fluoroscopy is helpful for guiding dilation of difficult or proximal esophageal structures. Balloon dilators disrupt structures by exertion of radial force, while mechanical dilators exert force radially and longitudinally. Potential complications of esophageal dilation include esophageal perforation and bleeding. The rules of three for esophageal dilation suggest that no more than three dilators of increasing size should be used in each dilation size, which allow increasing the lumen of the structures by about 3 millimeters. With mechanical dilators, the amount of resistance of a structures can be felt by endoscopic pressing the dilators, which also help guide therapy. Achalasia dilation is performed with 30 to 40 millimeter pneumatic balloons, typically with fluoroscopic guidance. Symptomatic improvement in dysphagia as high as 85%, but dysphagia returns in one third to half of patients. Complication of dilation can include bleeding and esophageal perforation, with rates of 0.1% for simple dilation and 3% for large pneumatic dilation. Next, esophageal stents. Esophageal stents are used to maintain the lumen in a variety of benign and malignant conditions. Stents are either self-expanding metal stents (CEMS) or self-expanding plastic stents or SEPS. Stents are composed of woven metal mesh that can to that can mesh that expand to exert radial force until the maximum diameter is reached. Multiple sizes and diameters are available. Certain metals are more flexible and are thus more appropriate for stenting across angulation. Seams have flares on one end to prevent migration. Seams can be wholly or partially covered with polymer membrane to prevent tumor infiltration. This allows for future repositioning of or removal. In contrast, ingrowth of tissue prevents the ability of uncovered seams to be removed or repositioned. Seams are completely covered with a silicone membrane to prevent tissue ingrowth. They were designed to facilitate ease of repositioning and removal. However, seps have high rates of migration and may not have long-term clinical efficacy for malignant conditions. Decision to use seps as opposed to cover seams has to be carefully made. Esophageal stents are developed over a guide wire, generally with fluoroscopic guidance. Esophageal lumens less than 12 mm require dilation prior to successful placement of seams. Complications of esophageal stents placement include bleeding and perforation, particularly with bulky upper esophageal tumors. Airway compression as the stents expands can be life-threatening, and simultaneously bronchoscopy with tracheal stent placement should be considered. Another complication of stent placement is pressure necrosis with subsequent fistula formation. Indication for esophageal stenting includes palliation for unresectable esophageal cancer. Dysphagia may be relieved in high proportion of patients, improving quality of life. Esophageal stents have also been used in benign esophagotracheal fistula, anastomotic leaks, or perforations. Although results have been favorable in multiple case series and observational studies for this condition, there are no randomized controlled trials comparing stents to surgical therapy. Esophageal stents for benign esophageal structures are used occasionally, but much less frequently than in malignant disease and with careful patient selection.